Yeah, hi there. These comments are for Rafat. This is Michael, the founder, owner, and the materials writer of the 7-step system to pass the TOEFL IBT, and you are one of my online students, and you have completed, I think it's the integrated practice test number 4, I believe, or number 3. But anyway, what I want to do right now is to go over your test and look at your writing, and I'm going to go ahead and make some editing suggestions based on what you've written. Now what we want to do right now is let's take a look at the reading passage first, and then let's take a look at the lecture, and then let's see what you did. So it says global warming is the increase in the average temperature of the Earth's near surface air and ocean since the mid-20th century and its projected continuation. According to the 2007 Fourth Assessment Report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, global surface temperature increased 0.74 degrees during the 20th century. Most of the observed temperature increase since the middle of the 20th century has been caused by the increasing concentrations of greenhouse gases which result from human activity such as the burning of fossil fuel and deforestation. Global dimming, a result of increasing concentrations of atmospheric aerosols that block sunlight from reaching the surface, has partially countered the effects of warming induced by greenhouse gases. Climate model projections summarized in the latest IPCC report indicate that the global surface temperature is likely to rise a further 1.1 to 6.4 degrees Celsius during the 21st century. The uncertainty in this estimate arises from the use of models with differing sensitivity to greenhouse gas concentrations and the use of differing estimates of future greenhouse gas emissions. An increase in global temperature will cause sea levels to rise and will change the amount and pattern of precipitation, probably including expansion of subtropical deserts. Warming is expected to be the strongest in the Arctic and would be associated with continuing retreat of glaciers, permafrost, and sea ice. Other likely effects include more frequent and intense extreme weather events, species extinctions, and changes in agricultural yields. Warming and related changes will vary from region to region around the globe, though the nature of these regional variations is uncertain. As a result of the contemporary increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide, the oceans have become more acidic, a result that is predicted to continue. Now we get into the lecture. Now it looks like so far we're getting into basically what global warming is, why it's caused, and then the different projections of what it might be like in the future, and some of the effects of global warming. That's part of what's going on in the reading. Now the lecture. There are differing views over what the appropriate policy response to climate change should be. These competing views weigh the benefits of limiting emissions of greenhouse gases against the costs. In general, it seems likely that climate change will impose greater damages and risks in poorer regions. Politics. Developed and developing countries have made different arguments over who should bear the burden of economic costs for cutting emissions. Now this is important for you, Rafat. Two ideas. Developed countries and developing countries. They're both looking at global warming and what we need to do about it. So let's see what developing countries say. Developing countries often concentrate on per capita emissions, that is, the total emissions of a country divided by its population. Per capita emissions in the industrialized countries are typically as much as 10 times the average in developing countries. This is used to make the argument that the real problem of climate change is due to the prolificate and unsustainable lifestyles of those living in rich countries. Now, what does that mean, Rafat? They're just saying that the people in the developed countries, they have a lot of cars, They have a lot of machines, appliances, they have big homes, and they're using air conditioning and heating and all of these things. They emit a lot of things into the atmosphere, and that causes a lot of trouble. So the developed countries are saying, look, the developing countries are causing most of the problem. That means they need to bear most of the responsibility for solving it. That's economic. Then we have, on the other hand, commentators from developed countries point out that total carbon emissions, carrying capacity, efficient energy use, and civil and political rights are very important issues. World population is the number of humans per capita area. However, the land is not the same everywhere. Not only the quantity of fossil fuel use, but also the quality of energy use is a key debate point. For example, efficient energy use supporting technological change might help reduce excess carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere. The use of fossil fuels for conspicuous consumption and excessive entertainment are issues that can conflict with civil and political rights. People in developed countries, now this is important, Rafat, they argue that history has proven the difficulty of implementing fair rationing programs in different countries because there is no global system of checks and balances or civil liberties. Now, what does that mean? It means that they're basically saying here that in developed countries, okay, if the United States, we go ahead and start cutting back on our emissions, but then if India does not, then what good is it for us to cut back if India isn't? India has a population of 1.1 billion people. We have a population of 300 million. So they're trying to argue that there's no check and balance system. So there's no fair way of getting everybody to bear the economic costs. So it looks like a pretty complicated issue. It says the Kyoto Protocol, which came into force into 2005, sets legally binding emission limitations for most developed countries. Developing countries are not subject to limitations. This exemption led the US and Australia to decide not to ratify the treaty, although Australia did finally ratify the treaty in December 2007. Debate continued at the Copenhagen Climate Summit and the Cancun Climate Summit. So, do you see what they're kind of saying there? So they're saying that if you guys want to pass a protocol or a treaty that enforces global warming among all developing or developed countries, it has to be enforced everywhere fairly, including the developing countries, not just the developed countries, or the US, according to the lecture, does not want to participate. Now, the last part of the lecture talks about the public opinion. So it says, in 2007-2008, Gallup polls surveyed 127 countries. Over a third of the world's population was unaware of global warming, with people in developing countries less aware than those in developed countries, and those in Africa the least aware. Of those aware, Latin America leads the belief that temperature changes are a result of human activities, while Africa, parts of Asia and the Middle East, and a few countries from the former Soviet Union lead in the opposite belief. In the Western world, opinions over the concept and the appropriate responses are divided. Nick Pigeon of Cardiff University said that results show that different stages of engagement about global warming on each side of the Atlantic, adding, the debate about Europe is about what action needs to be taken, while many in the U.S. still debate whether climate change is happening. A 2010 poll by the Office of National Statistics found that 75% of UK respondents were at least fairly convinced that the world's climate is changing, compared to 87% in a similar survey in 2006. A January 2011 ICM poll in the UK found 83% of respondents viewed climate change as a current or imminent threat, while 14% said it was no threat. Opinion was unchanged in an August 2009 poll asking the same question, though there had been a slight polarization of opposing views. So a survey in October 2009 by the Pew Research Center for the People and the Press showed decreasing public perception in the United States that global warming was a serious problem. all political persuasion show reduced concern, with the lowest concern among Republicans, only 35% of whom considered there to be solid evidence of global warming. The cause of this marked difference in public opinion between the United States and the global public is uncertain, but the hypothesis has been advanced that clearer communication by scientists, both directly and through the media, would be helpful in adequately informing the American public of the scientific consensus and the basis for it. So, there is divided opinion. And it looks like, according to this lecture, the United States is not at agreement with a lot of the rest of the world. And there's even people who don't even know about global warming. In fact, over 1/3 aren't even aware that it's a problem at all. So that's kind of some of the ideas there. Now let's take a look at what you wrote. Okay, so when we take a look at your essay, so we have, in this set of materials, reading passage asserts changes at temperature degrees and its reflection upon some of the natural resources like seas and agricultural yields. Lecture supports reading passage, adding that it is important for countries to be aware enough towards these changes. Okay, so what I want to do right now is I'm just going to read it and give you a score, and then after that I will do some editing. Okay, so let's keep going. Right now I'm just going to read it. So reading passage can give us a point of view for changes in temperature and provides us also by some reasons of global warming, such as burning of fossil fuel and deforestation, and global dimming as a result of increasing concentrations of atmospheric aerosols. Nature has mainly damaged by these conditions and affected a lot at rising sea levels and agricultural yields. Lecture can't deny these changes, especially at climates. Lecture also adds sensitivity and awareness of countries toward temperature changes. And it does talk about that. That was a good thing that you pointed out there. Although there is no stable system of checks among countries and balances or civil liberties, Kyoto Protocol at 2005 appeared legally building emission limitation for most developed countries. In general, people in developed and rich countries such as United States and Australia less aware than others, which they had not developed enough. As a research for countries' beliefs according to these changes in temperature degrees, Latin America has a belief that temperature changes are a result of human activities, but many other countries at Africa and Asia have an opposite belief. Europeans think about what action needs to be taken, and a survey in October 2009 by the Pew Research Center and the press mentioned clearly decreasing public perception in the United States that global warming was a serious problem, adding to this lowest concern among Republicans. Yes, you have some ideas here. To sum up, the reading passage's idea that changes in temperature degrees among worldwide are a fact which we must face seriously. This is exactly what lecture try to focus on about dealing with. Okay, so now the question is, what are you going to score and why? So I'm probably going to put you, I think you're better than the last time you did this. I'm going to put you at about 2.0. Maybe not. I'm going to say 1.75 out of 5, or 12 points out of 30. So the problem is where it says here, your response contains little meaningful or relevant content from the lecture. I'm going to say that's false. You do have some relevant content from the lecture. You could improve the organization of it. You do have some severe language errors that make it difficult to understand your meaning, right? So that's why I'm going to give you the score I'm giving you now, 1.75 out of 12. So now we want to take a look at revising your particular essay. So I think your first paragraph, you're getting too specific. you want to be a little more general than what you're doing here. So here's what I would say. You'd say something like, in this set of material, the reading passage defines global warming. We know it does that. It defines global warming. And it projects how about makes future, we'll say climate projections. So in this set of materials, the reading passage defines global warming, makes future climate projections, explains the environmental effects of this phenomenon. Now this is so complicated, and I'm telling you, the TOEFL would not be this complicated. I like to have reading passages and lectures that are even tougher. They're more difficult than the actual integrated writing task, and I don't make the connections as predictable. I like to make it work a little bit. So if you can understand how to connect this reading passage to this lecture, you can do anything. So we do know the reading passage defines global warming, it makes future climate projections, and explains the environmental effects of this phenomenon. Then when you talk about the reading passage, or the lecture, you might say, the lecture adds to this information by explaining the different policies this is where I think you're getting into some trouble from the perspective of developed and developing countries. I think this is going to really capture what's going on here. So this was kind of complicated. So let's take a look at what we did. In this set of materials, the reading passage defines global warming, makes future climate projections, and explains the environmental effects of this phenomenon. The lecture adds to this information by explaining the different policies of global warming from the perspective of developed and developing countries. Now we've really outlined what we want to do in this particular passage. So now we're going to get rid of this paragraph, and then we'll start with your next paragraph. You might say something like, first of all, the reading passage, I wouldn't say can, just say gives us a point of view you might say rising temperature changes I think you should probably say, as it says in the lecture, since the mid 20th century. And I think it's important to say that it has increased 0.18 degrees Celsius. You'll say has increased 0.18 108 degrees 0.18 degrees Celsius. You might say it is argued global warming is caused by the burning of fossil fuels, so burning of fossil fuels, maybe put a comma here, deforestation, you see, this is a little bit of a tricky part here. You got this global dimming thing. It says in the reading passage, global dimming has partially countered the effects of warming induced by greenhouse gases. Global dimming, it kind of means it's making it cooler, which means it's kind of countering the warming effects by blocking the sunlight from reaching the surface. So it's argued that global warming is caused by the burning of fossil fuels and deforestation, and global dimming that's actually pretty good grammar there. Global dimming as a result of increasing concentrations of atmospheric aerosols. You probably have to say here that prevent sunlight from reaching the Earth's surface. Global dimming, a result of increasing concentrations of atmospheric aerosols that prevent sunlight from reaching the Earth's surface. You might say has countered I talk the whole time when I'm doing this, but to be honest with you, Rafat, I can't talk and think at the same time. So when I'm working on your essay here, I hope you don't get too bored with me. But I'm going to say has countered to a lesser degree the effects of global warming. I'm using the word lesser degree, which goes back to has partially countered. So has countered to a lesser degree the effects of global warming. It is, and we're getting probably saying too much here. We need to get to the lecture now. It is projected will warm another maybe 1.1 to 6.4. That's incredible. Okay, so we're good. So we need to work on your topic sentence here in this next paragraph. But I think we have the first two done now. I think we're moving in the right direction. So paragraph 1, in this set of materials, the reading passage defines global warming, makes future climate projections, and explains the environmental effects of this phenomenon. The lecture adds to this information by explaining the different policies of global warming from the perspective of developed and developing countries. See, that's the topic sentence needs to say something about developed or developing countries. According to the lecture, we'll say let's take a look at developing countries or developed countries. Actually, maybe it's better to talk about this in the lecture. Talked about developing countries first. Okay, so we want to get exactly what the developing countries that are arguing here. So as it says in the lecture, developing countries concentrate on the per capita emissions. So they say it's used to make the argument that the real problem is due to the unsustainable lifestyles of those living in the rich countries. So developing countries argue that the rich countries, due to their up to 10 times more greenhouse gases than those in developed countries. Therefore, they argue that developed countries should bear most of the cost That's probably good enough there. So according to the lecture, developing countries argue that the rich countries, due to their unsustainable lifestyles, are emitting up to 10 times more greenhouse gases than those in developed countries. Therefore, they argue that developed countries should bear most of the cost in terms of how to respond to global warming. Maybe that's not better. Should bear most of the cost maybe combat global warming. Then you might say, on the other hand, the developed countries this is where you kind of get into trouble a little bit here. You say system of checks among countries and balances, but it's like check and balances. I'll show you how to say this in just a minute. There's no fair way to, we might say, a system of checks and balances that all countries both developed and developing maybe something like that. On the other hand, the developed countries claim maybe so you might say, on the other hand, the developed countries claim that there is no fair way to develop a system of checks and balances when it comes to ensuring that all countries, both developed and developing, are significantly reducing their carbon emissions. So in other words, is not fair for some countries implementing the policies Maybe we'll say environmental measures here. That might be good, Ian. Okay, I think that's good enough there. So you have, according to the lecture, developing countries argue that the rich countries, due to their unsustainable lifestyles, are emitting up to 10 times more greenhouse gases than those in developed countries. Therefore, they argue that developed countries should bear most of the costs in terms of what to do to combat global warming. On the other hand, the developed countries claim there is no fair way to develop a system of checks and balances when it comes to ensuring that all countries, both developed and developing, are significantly reducing their carbon emissions. In other words, implementing global warming policies according to political commentators in developed countries are not fair if some countries are exempt to having to maybe enact these new environmental policies. And then the last paragraph, let's take a look at what we have here. So you're getting to the last part of it, which is more getting into what's called the public opinion polls. Then you might say, finally, according to the lecture, and we have to get into the public opinion part of it. Okay, I think we're okay here. I think we can get rid of this. Let's go to your next paragraph. What the public opinion is regarding global warming. You might use something like this. For example, Latin America, I would say, has a belief that temperature changes are, we would say, are the result of human activities. Then you might say, but many other countries, such as Africa and Asia, have an opposite belief. That's good, that's accurate. And you might want to say, in addition, probably you can connect the Europeans and the Americans together. You say, in addition, Europeans think about what action needs to be taken. Probably get rid of, we're probably going over the 250 word limit here. You might say, comma, whereas there is clearly decreasing public opinion. Public perception is good. Public perception in the United States that global warming is a serious problem. How about this? With the lowest concern among Republicans. That's good. You got a lot of good ideas in here. This is a tough one for you right now. This is a tough kind of writing for you. I can tell you're struggling a little bit with the language, with the grammar. This is probably good enough right here. I don't know that you need to worry about this, because we're already way over. I mean, if you can do this in 20 minutes, I'm telling you, you're going to get 30 out of 30. It's going to be a really good score here. Okay, I think we're in pretty good shape now. So I took your essay and I kind of made a few changes. We introduced the reading in the lecture. We discussed some of it. Okay, now let's go over this one more time. So in this set of materials, the reading passage defines global warming, makes future climate projections, and explains the environmental effects of this phenomena. The lecture adds to this information by explaining the different policies of global warming from the perspective of developed and developing countries. First of all, the reading passage gives us a point of view for rising temperature changes since the mid-20th century. In fact, the temperature has increased 0.18 degrees centigrade, and it is argued that global warming is caused by the burning of fossil fuels, deforestation, and global warming. And global dimming, a result of increasing concentrations of atmospheric aerosols that prevent sunlight from reaching the Earth's surface, has countered to a lesser degree the effects of global warming. It is projected that the Earth will warm another 1.1 to 6.4 degrees centigrade during the 21st century. According to the lecture, developing countries argue that the rich countries, due to their unsustainable lifestyles, are emitting up to 10 times more greenhouse gases than those in developed countries. Therefore, they argue that developed countries should bear most of the cost in terms of what to do to combat global warming. On the other hand, the developed countries claim that there is no fair way to develop a system of checks and balances when it comes to ensuring that all countries, both developed and developing, are significantly reducing their carbon emissions. In other words, implementing global warming policies, according to political commentators, in developed countries are not fair, as some countries are exempt to having to enact these new environmental measures. Finally, according to the lecture, don't need that, just say finally, the lecture explains what the public opinion is regarding global warming. For example, Latin America has a belief that temperature changes are the result of human activities, but many other countries such as Africa and Asia have an opposite belief. In addition, Europeans think about what action needs to be taken, whereas there is clearly decreasing public perception in the United States that global warming is a serious problem, with the lowest concern among Republicans. And there you go. So the main thing here is, with your integrated writing, I think part of what's giving you a lower score is you want to make sure that you get the gist. You understand exactly what's going on in the reading passage and what exactly is going on in the lecture. So because you didn't really mention the idea of the developing or the developed countries, I think that was a key point of the lecture, and the fact that you left that out, that didn't help you score that much. And also you had a few grammar and some language use issues, as I showed in the editing of your paper. Alright, so there we go. And thank you for your hard work, and keep up the good work.